G'day guys, welcome back to True Eagle. Today we're doing the part 2 of the series I started where I'm evaluating all the young talent on our league based on the first half of this season. So in part 1, I have mostly focused on players that have spent most of their time in the AFL this year, and specifically those who are 24 or younger. So I use the year 2000 as a cutoff. If a player turns 24 or younger in the year 2000, they qualify as young talent. A little bit arbitrary, but that's the boundary I've decided. We do have quite a lot of young players on our list. I think there's like 21 or 22 players under the age of 21. So there's quite a few players to talk about. So I have done part 1 if you want to go check that out, with the important caveat that due to human error, forgive me, I left out Campbell Chester in the first video. I guess I'm still warming up, getting back into the content game regularly. So forgive me, he will feature in this video. Just as an aside, we are a few days away from West Coast taking on Essendon. So I've done a preview for that game and I will be live streaming on the True Footy YouTube channel this weekend. It'll be on at 4 a.m. in England. I'll be watching the games. If anyone wants to tune in with me, it'd be great to have you join on the stream as well. So let's talk about these young talents. There's quite a few. So like I said, the focus of this video is mostly players who are featured in the Waffle team primarily rather than the AFL team, with a couple of players that I'll just eliminate here. So Elijah Hewitt probably would be in the AFL side, hasn't played any Waffle or AFL. There's no real review here other than the fact that he and Rhett Bazzo, who this also applies to, has not played a single game this year. Both of them are expected to hopefully play some Waffle minutes in the next 4 weeks. So we're hoping to see that just as a little update there. So let's talk about Campbell Chester, a player that should have featured in the first video because he hasn't played a single game of Waffle this year. So Campbell has just turned 21. He's played 13 games this year and I think about 27 or 28 overall. Now his averages in terms of stats, let's go through the stats first. He's averaging about 11 disposals a game, which is more or less what he was averaging last year, bearing in mind 3 sub-affected games this year. And it's worth noting as well, he's only had 2 games where he's had 15 or more disposals in a single game. And like I said, those numbers don't really scream improvement or high production, obviously. But we do bear in mind that if you compare him to other wingmen, particularly in this West Coast team, that's pretty standard. That's pretty par for the course. And in fact, Andrew Gaff's 21 possessions, which was, I think, against St Kilda, must have been the highest possession count of any player playing predominantly on the wing. And we see even Jinby's not getting that much of the footy. So 11 disposals is very modest, even with the 3 sub-affected games. But we bear that in mind, it just seems to be a bit of a thankless position at the moment, a lot of unrewarded running. So what are we seeing with Campbell and what he's doing with the ball in hand? And I would say that there has been an improvement. I think he's looking a little bit more composed than last year. It is baby steps. I won't, over milk. Is that the expression? Over-exaggerate his improvement this year, but I think it has at least been clearly there, and I'm comfortable with the player that we currently have. I don't necessarily see A-grade potential. I think he's going to be slow and steady, but I can see him being a very reliable performer over time. And think fast forward 12 months, when he hits 50 games, we could see a very different player altogether. But as I said, his disposal count hasn't really gone up significantly. He has improved his efficiency from 67 to 74. He's also halved his clangers. So that was kind of a feature of Campbell last year. The team was a mess. He came in, a little bit overexposed, it has to be said, a little bit hot potato-y. I haven't really seen that from Campbell this year, and I've actually seen him play really well. There's been games where he hasn't necessarily had a high possession count at the end of the game, but he had a big quarter here or there. I think he's used the ball well. I think his speed has been a feature. I can remember that big rundown tackle. There's been some moments from Campbell, and he's hit the scoreboard as well, kicked a few goals, which is something that he failed to do last year. His meters gained is slightly up. He's slightly more contested than he was last year. His composure is definitely better. So I'd say slow and steady progress for Campbell. I think keeping him in the AFL side, while, maybe he wasn't best 22 for a lot of that, I think we are investing in the future here, and I think it's slowly paid dividends. So we'll move on to, I'll move down in descending order of age. So Harry Edwards qualifies for this. He turns 24 in October of this year, so still relatively young in terms of key position players as well. This is usually where they're maybe the start of their prime. I feel like his physical development is starting to get there. He looks a lot stronger, but he's played 3 AFL games and 6 Waffle games this year, and he's just played the 5 games of AFL in the last 2 years. He's been severely hampered with injury, which has halted his development, no doubt, and possibly, I feel like, maybe he is at the point of his development where he needs to spend time in the AFL against these AFL quality key position forwards and in our system to really improve. I don't know if we will get much of that if he stays in the waffle. So that's just an interesting thing we'll need to consider. Since he's been back in the team, about 4.7 marks a game, 2.7 tackles. Not a lot of stats you can really glean for a key position defender. However, I think from the eye test, he is contributing and he's looking a little bit more assured. And it's still line ball as to whether he has a future for us, but probably a player that we want to invest in. Now, he is out of contract at the end of the year, which means a second half of the year of continuity, and whether that's AFL or playing in the waffle, but playing really well and dominating. He's played some good performances in the waffle this year. He's probably had some lackluster ones, but I think the recent form is good. And I think his last waffle game, he had like 24 possessions, and he's capable of that. He had a 30 possession game, well, a couple of years ago in the waffle now as well. So my best case scenario is Harry Edwards re-earns a contract. I'd really like to see that because I think our list needs it for where it's at. Now let's talk about Zan Truong, who just turned 22 and has played, I think, 7 games of AFL now generally. 2 in 2022, 4 last year, and 1 game this year. Bearing in mind there's been some injuries at play with Zan Truong, and I think he had a late start to this year as well because of a back injury. I think he missed a lot of the preseason, but I think we've seen real progress for him as he's built into the season in the waffle, particularly the last 5 weeks. The last 5 waffle games he's played, he's averaging 27 disposals, 5.5 tackles, 4.5 marks, and I think he's been clearly our best and most consistent waffle performer when he's been in the side. Now, he just seems to be right at the top end of the waffle in terms of our team, and probably just on the cusp of genuinely breaking into the AFL side. And because he's pretty much an on-baller purely, like he doesn't really play on the flank, it's much more difficult for him to get an avenue into this AFL side without an injury. Now, I did kind of hope we'd see him come back in against Essendon. Team was released today. That is not going to be the case. So again, a player out of contract, and to re-earn a contract, I think he needs to break his way into the AFL team. Will he be given that opportunity? I think I would have liked to have seen a bit more of exposure on Zan Truong, and I just mean, when he comes in, I can understand why you'd make him the sub, but I think that, at least play him in his desired position when we're at that point of our development as a side, that we can take a few risks and chuck Zan Truong a little bit more on ball. So hopefully we find a spot for him in the second half of the year, or at least hopefully he earns it. But I do think if I had to guess now, I'd be surprised if he stays on our list next year. Let's move on to Jai Culley. He is 21. He's played 1 AFL game this year against North Melbourne, if I'm not mistaken. That was the only game, right? Good, I'm not going crazy. I just double-checked. 1 AFL game, he had 14 possessions, 4 marks, 4 inside 50s, which is rock solid. Obviously, the context with Culley is that he won a Rising Star nomination last year with a 4-goal bag, playing up forward, did his ACL maybe a fortnight or even a week later, I think. Then has returned to the waffle side in round 2 of this year and had some modest low possession games, single digit, probably playing primarily forward. Since then, in his last 3 waffle games prior to his AFL return, he was averaging 26 disposals, 3 tackles, 5 marks, and he kicked 4 goals across those 3 games. So probably up there with True in terms of, reliable top-end production in the waffle. So then he's re-earned his spot in the AFL side. So there's only so much we can review so far because he's come from a long way back. He's had a really good block of form in the waffle and a solid return to the AFL side. What his future looks like at AFL level is interesting. Another player that I'll say is out of contract, but probably a better chance to re-earn a contract than, say, a Zan Truong. And I think his ability to play forward as that resting 194 centimetre third tall, if you want to call it that, will give him opportunities at AFL level, and hopefully he can build into getting some on-ball minutes. And I think in his 1 AFL game, he had 39% centre bounces, which is probably better than I was expecting, to be honest. That's reasonable exposure. Perhaps with Dom Sheed out of the side this week, Jai Culley might get more opportunities at the coalface, and we'll see what happens from there. But, you can't really fault Jai Culley on this year. I think it's gone about as well as we could have possibly hoped. I think he's done a really good job, and that's worth some commendation, as it were. So let's talk about Harry Barnett. Now, he is 20. He's a baby for a ruck. 203 centimetre player, and weirdly has played 1 AFL game this year. It seemed kind of pointless at the time. Obviously, with Matthew Flynn's injury in round 2, we decided to play Barnett and Bailey Williams in the same side, and, had a modest result, and I'm not blaming him for that. He's really young for a ruck, and playing AFL at that age, other than, say, like a Toby Conway, it doesn't really happen too often, or a Luke Jackson as well. But, we should have had modest expectations. He played the AFL game and came straight back out. So he's gone back to the waffle. He's played 6 games and averaging about 20 hitouts a game. 7 disposals, 3 tackles, and just under 2 marks. So pretty modest results. Again, in the waffle, as a 20-year-old, he is still quite young for a ruck in the waffle. So 20 hitouts is okay. I don't think, from a numbers point of view, there's anything to be concerned about. I do think one of those games was injury affected against Peel. I think he finished that game game early, he only had about 5 hitouts. So I'm going to assume that one game was injury affected. I'm not actually 100% sure about that. Overall, he can be quite up and down. There's probably, there's some waffle watchers out there who've probably questioned his competitiveness, and, we'll see long term. But at the moment, I think he's got a physical disadvantage. And long story short as well, he's been given a 2-year contract extension. I think that's justified. I think he's gone okay. He's played 2 AFL games and his waffle performances have been solid. I think if you're willing to eject a 20-year-old key position player after the form he's shown, I feel like if you're going to give up on a key position player that early, not many will be able to stay on your list and actually develop. So comfortable with where that is. Obviously, over time, he will get bigger, he will get stronger, he'll get more confident, and we'll see him evolve. But I definitely think he has the potential to be a long-term AFL player. I don't know what his talent ceiling is, but I think we see an AFL quality ruck potentially eventually. Tyrell J is the next player to discuss. He's 20 years old, and I am very happy with what we've seen from Tyrell. Again, bear in mind the context, a player that came through the academy system as a Cat B rookie. So we need to bear that in mind as well. Him getting to his ceiling is going to take longer. He's a bit more of a project, a little bit less developed than your typical, national draftee, for instance. When you consider how much of a joke the Waffle team was last year, he played in a game where it was just him and the other Cat B rookie, Jordan Baker. For him to not only compete week in, week out, but also have a pretty good end to the year last year and actually develop in that team, I think really speaks volumes. To then also carry that into this year, earn a debut, but also play 3 games of AFL footy. I think he played a full game in his first AFL game. He had 9 possessions and a goal, and it was a good goal, and I think he showed talent. That was against Collingwood, I believe. Then he was subbed twice with no real impact, gone back to the Waffle. Overall played 7 Waffle games this year, averaged about 12.5 disposals, just over a goal a game. And again, as a forward half player, I find it a little tricky to assess just on raw numbers. The Waffle team has not been super competitive. So if you're a forward half player and you're not kicking that many goals, I'm not going to necessarily personally hold that against them. And I think in the last 3 Waffle games, his tackle numbers have also gone up. In fact, he's averaging 3 over his last 4 games, and that is progress. I think looking at the stats, a lot of our forward half players are not getting a lot of tackles. They're not keeping the ball inside 50 in the Waffle team. But either way, long story short, I think AFL level talent, good chance to feature in the AFL side at some point in the second half of the season, unless we have some sort of dream injury run. Level of development over time has been more than acceptable for a Cat B rookie, and similar to what I said about Barnett, if you're unwilling to give someone like a Dewar who was a Cat B rookie any more time, you're probably not going to unearth too many more talents through, the Cat B system. So long story short, Tyrell J, I believe, is out of contract, and I would like to see him re-earn a contract. Now let's talk about his buddy, Jordan Baker, who is the other Cat B rookie through our academy system. Now, Baker's 20, a bit of a tallish halfback flanker, a bit of a wingman convert, playing mostly in defense for the Waffle Eagles, and has been solid as far as I can tell. 13.5 disposals, 3 marks, 2 tackles a game. Again, from as far as development goes, he was pretty skinny and raw, and it's hard to have really high expectations on a Cat B rookie considering the baptism of fire that has been the case for players playing mostly in the Waffle. Now, to what extent does he earn another contract? I think it's probably unlikely, not because he's done anything wrong, but I think probably just maybe lacks some outstanding attributes. When you consider the modern day defender either has to be really defensively sound or they have to hurt you the other way. And I'm not sure if Baker has those weapons, and maybe that's my own ignorance as well. But I think we need to see a pretty outstanding second half of the year for Baker to earn a contract. But I do admire what he's done so far. He's been more than acceptable in the Waffle team. But sometimes that's just not quite enough to re-earn another contract. Let's talk about Kobe Burile. Now, Burile is the correct pronunciation, I believe. He is still 19 and a player that I really thought we'd see debut by now. Part of that has been injury. He has played the 6 Waffle games, so that's solid, but he started the year, if I'm not mistaken, under an injury cloud and, missed, I think it was his hammy earlier in the year, which just meant that, he lost a little bit of momentum early in the season. But he's averaging 16 disposals a game, just the 1 tackle, 2.5 marks, just the 1 goal this year. As far as I can tell, I think he's had a bit more of a move from a halfback flank to more of a wing role, or at least that's where he's starting to get named in the Waffle side. It's actually hard to tell. But overall, we know this guy produces weapons. He's very quick and has very good skills, and is actually a forward midfielder convert that's turned into a halfback flanker. But as far as I can tell, doesn't seem to be anywhere near the AFL side. Now, I don't know what he needs to do to get his way into the team. If his avenue into the team is through a medium defensive position or a small defender role. We've actually kind of been blessed, touch wood, in terms of injuries and our depth in that that position is pretty good. So it is going to be a little bit of a crunch on list spots this year. So I'm not too sure what the medium-term future holds for Kobe Burile. It would be great to see him debut. I wouldn't be surprised if we throw him a bone towards the end of the year to see what he's got before making a decision on his future, but probably hasn't had the same impact that we'd expected up to this point, bearing in mind he is only 19. So we'll wait and see on Kobe Burile. Now let's talk about Clay Hall, a insider midfielder we drafted from Peel Thunder last year, who has just turned 19, so pretty young in the scheme of things. And for the record as well, is on a 2-year contract, so not a player fighting for his spot on the list. But how have we assessed Clay Hall so far? So rewinding a little bit to the preseason, a lot of reports coming out that he was pretty close to a round 1 debut. Busts his ankle to some extent, or at least sprains it badly in a tackle from Elliot Yeo, and then loses momentum, doesn't feature in the preseason games, and naturally starts the year in the waffle. But from 8 waffle games, he actually only cracked 20 possessions once in his first 5 games. So the reason that that's relevant is because, interestingly, in the last 3 weeks, he's done that 3 times in a row, and he had his best game at waffle level in general against Perth the other day with 5 tackles and 30 possessions. Now, that was kind of timed poorly because Jai Cully also came in and played his best game for the year and re-earned probably the same spot in the side. But we've seen a clear uplift in possessions and output from Clay Hall in recent times, so that is definitely progress. And he's playing a difficult role at waffle level. He's playing as a primary on baller, and you'd imagine he's going to take time to be able to do that same level of output at the AFL level because, he is relatively big and relatively developed for a guy who's just turned 19, but, consider the size of the modern midfielder these days. I can understand the reluctance to risk someone like a Clay Hall in the side. Now, he's a pretty good two-way runner, averaged about 3.5 tackles a game. I think he's pretty well balanced. It'd be great to see him crack a debut, only because, we like to see the list turned over. We like to see exposure to our young talent, and Clay Hall does present as a relatively promising young midfielder. So hopefully we see him in the back end of the year. He's not doing a lot wrong. He's been fairly consistent. He's actually one I'm kind of happy to wait and see a little bit. I think, another preseason in the gym and his output will lift significantly. And to put up the numbers he is at the moment, having been 18 for most of the year, I think, is very solid. I don't think he is necessarily real close to an AFL debut, but it could happen in the second half of the year depending on how the cards fall. So we got Cohen Livingston, who is a more recent Next Generation Academy talent. Just turned 19 as well, even though he looks like a man. You may remember seeing him in the preseason game, I think particularly against Fremantle, and he held his own okay for a guy that was, I think, 18 at the time. He's played all 9 waffle games this year, and it's either been his second or first ruck. Barnett had like a shin splint injury for a little while there. Archer Reed joined the team a little bit later as well. So again, that's a lot of responsibility for a guy who was 18 for the most of the year to be number 1 ruck, because there are some pretty big, mature waffle rucks. That being said, I think his output has been solid. 10.5 disposals, 12 hitouts, and he's just kicked the 2 goals all year, playing, I think his ideal position is forward, who rucks as well. I think Cohen, is one of those players that's a bit more competitor than he is athlete, and, I think he's held his own really well in the waffle this year. And like I said before, if you're talking about a 200 centimeter prospect, I think you have to be willing to invest some time into them, and I think Cohen is going to be one of those players. And I feel like looking at his profile, his physical profile, it won't take him as long as the average young fella to build into that waffle level or AFL level strength. I think that's his advantage. I believe he'll be out of contract at the end of the year, and I imagine he's done enough to earn another contract. But again, it's hard to tell with list spots sometimes. So we got 3 players left. The first one is Locke Rollinson, our second debutant this year behind Harley Reid. Again, just another player who's just turned 19. Debuted as the sub against Sydney at Adelaide Hills, had the 4 touches, 1 tackle, 1 behind, and was subsequently dropped back to the waffle. That debut was earned on the back of a 3-goal, 14 possession performance in his waffle debut in round 1, and he came straight into the AFL side, which is very commendable. Since then, he hasn't really recaptured that form, particularly in terms of numbers. He's actually only hit double-digit possessions in a game once since that debut, so he hasn't really recaptured it. In his first 5 games, he's only had 5 tackles in total, so small pressure forward, lightly built, whose game is mostly built around pressure and, I suppose, tackling as well as goals. In terms of raw numbers, we haven't really seen that from Locke, and he's only kicked 3 goals in 6 games since that debut. However, I do think it's important and fair to offer the caveat that if you were a 67 kilo or whatever drafter he was, I think that was what he was at the time. If your game's built around pressure and tackling, he still applies the pressure. He probably just isn't laying that many tackles. Part of that is, physical strength might be a factor, but also the defensive pressure of the Waffle Eagle side in general. There's not a lot of like team defense happening in that forward 50, and that makes it hard for a guy in Locke Rollinson to actually affect tackles and pressure stats and stuff. So he was picked 1 in the rookie draft last year, out of contract naturally this year. I'd be surprised if they don't give him another shot, but like I said, there's a few players I've said that about in this video, so we're going to have to make some tough calls. We'll see. It'd be really nice for him to get his hands on the footy a little bit more at Waffle level. I don't think it's necessary for him to re-earn a spot in the AFL team to earn that other contract, considering developmentally he's young and skinny. He's going to need that development and another preseason before we see him closer to what he will hopefully eventually become. It's just how willing the club is to be patient on that. So hopefully a good second half of the year in the Waffle for Locke. Harvey Johnston might be one of the hidden gems we got from last year's draft, much was said of Clay Hall, who we already discussed, but Harvey Johnston came in and picked him for a debut, which is something that I did not foresee as being likely this year. So Harvey's still 18. I think he turns 19 in August and, looks like he's 18 and, skinny kid. Great attitude, like very, very likable player. He's played the 2 games at AFL level, both as sub versus the Bombers and the Pies, and against the Pies he was pretty good, I thought. 8 possessions, 3 marks, 2 inside 50s in the time on ground that he had. Around that, he's had 6 Waffle games, averaging about 14.5 disposals. He's only kicked 2 goals a year, but they were in the same game that won him a spot in the AFL side, and I think his blend of composure, skill, evasiveness, just general busyness, intensity, speaks to me like we've actually found someone who can play at AFL level. And he's also in a position that we kind of need. We need some outside class. We need some running power. And I think that Harvey's done pretty well considering how lightly built and skinny he is. And, it'd be great to see him in a preseason. And I feel like it's entirely possible that we see Harvey become a regular player in the AFL side as early as next year. Based on what I've seen, he just needs a little bit of that physical development. And he does have the safety of a contract as well. But I've liked the way he uses the footy. I like the way that he's always able to take that extra second to use the ball well. And this is something that our young under-22 side probably lacks, in terms of a genuine quality wingman. So potentially, in 12 months' time, is there an Andrew Gaff on a list? Is there a Luke Edwards? You can see the avenue for Harvey Johnston coming in and being a regular contributor fairly easily. And the final player is Archer Reid, who probably has almost the least to say about him. With all due respect, he's 18. Started the year late because of a knee injury, 203 centimeter prospect. To be fair, he's not as skinny as he once was. I think when he was drafted, he was an absolute beanpole, and you can tell he's put that time during rehab to put some weight on, and that's going to be good for his game. Obviously, that in itself is going to be an adjustment, but he returned in round 4. He's played 6 games, just 7.5 disposals a game, 2 marks, 4 hit-outs, 1 tackle, and just kicked the 2 goals as well from those 6 games. So again, being fair, obviously he's coming from a long way back, relatively skinny, growing into his body still, playing in a team, probably not getting the ball inside 50, and when they do, probably not keeping the ball inside 50. So the opportunities to assess Archer aren't really there. So I think this is just going to be a case of getting him some exposure, continuing his progress in developing into his own body and building confidence in the Waffle. Definitely an AFL quality talent with his athleticism and, his height and ability to obviously ruck in the forward 50. And I think he's our tallest Eagle. So there's clear weapons there for Archer, and I'm willing to be patient. I think he's definitely got a 2-year contract, which means he's out of contract at the end of next year. And I think one that we're going to be slow and steady with. So we've got a number of talls there that are developing in the background. It would be great to see more in the back half to balance out what we have in the front half. But overall, it's been solid. There's a lot of raw talent in there, and it'll be tough this year looking at list spots, and I've referenced obviously the contract statuses, all of them. A lot of defenders, medium-sized defenders out of contract this year, which will make it a very interesting off-season. But that is my attempt at wrapping how everyone in the Waffle predominantly has gone this season. Let me know in the comments anything you'd like to add or anything you agree with or disagree with. And for now, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.